The Airbnb looked perfect online. It was a small, standalone cabin in the woods, far enough from the main road to feel private, but not so deep in the wilderness that it felt unsafe. The pictures showed a cozy living room with a fireplace, a spacious kitchen, and a bedroom with huge windows that overlooked the trees. It had everything I was looking for: peace, quiet, and a break from my normal routine. I booked it for a full week. The check-in process was simple. The host messaged me the day before with detailed instructions on how to get there and how to unlock the door. Everything was remote, which I preferred. No awkward meet and greet, just a keypad entry and a place to myself. The drive up was peaceful, the roads winding through thick trees, the occasional clearing revealing views of distant hills. Felt like a real escape, exactly what I had wanted. The cabin looked just like the photos. It sat on a small clearing, surrounded by tall trees. The wood siding was slightly weathered, giving it a rustic charm. There was a small porch with 2 chairs and a table, a perfect spot for morning coffee. The front door had a keypad lock, just like the host had described. Inside, it was warm and inviting. The furniture was simple but well chosen, the kitchen stocked with basic supplies. The bed was made neatly with fresh sheets, the bathroom spotless. There was even a welcome note on the counter, along with a book about local hiking trails. The first day was perfect. I unpacked, made a quick meal, and spent the evening reading by the fireplace. The silence outside was deep, interrupted only by the occasional sound of wind through the trees or the distant hoot of an owl. By the second day, I had settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings started with coffee on the porch, followed by long hikes through the nearby trails. I spent the afternoons reading, cooking simple meals, and enjoying the solitude. It was exactly the break I had needed, but by the third night, things started feeling off. I noticed it first with small things, items not quite where I remembered leaving them. The kitchen towel I had draped over the sink was suddenly folded neatly on the counter. A chair I had pushed in at the dining table was slightly pulled out. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I had absent-mindedly moved things and just didn't remember. But then, that night, I heard something outside. It was past midnight, the cabin completely silent except for the soft crackling of the dying fire. I had been reading in bed when I heard it, the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps. I froze, my heartbeat instantly pounding in my ears. I waited, barely breathing, straining to hear. The steps moved across the porch, then stopped. The cabin had no curtains in the main living area, only in the bedroom. If someone was standing out there, they could see inside. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. The cabin had Wi-Fi, but no cell service. If I needed help, I'd have to message the host or use the emergency contact they had provided in the welcome email. I stayed completely still, listening. Minutes passed. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe. Something harmless. But I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I checked the porch. There were no footprints, but the ground was hard-packed dirt, not the kind that would show clear tracks. Still, the feeling that someone had been out there lingered. That evening, I double-checked the door locks before bed. I had locked them every night, but this time I made sure. I checked the windows, too. Everything was secure. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. Took me a second to realize why. There had been a sound. Something inside the cabin. A faint creak, like a footstep on the wooden floor. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. The room was pitch dark. The only light came from the glowing numbers on my phone screen. I listened, my entire body tense. Another creak. Closer. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough that I could see a sliver of the living room. Nothing moved, but the air felt different. Charged, like someone else was there. I reached for my phone with shaky hands. I had to turn on the flashlight, but I was terrified of what I might see. I tapped the screen, and the light flooded the room. Nothing. The bedroom door was still open, just a crack. The living room looked exactly the same as before. I forced myself to get up, my body screaming at me to stay in bed. I inched toward the door, peering through the gap. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. Everything was where it should be. But the kitchen towel, the one I had left folded on the counter, was now on the floor. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, my hands shaking. I searched every inch of the cabin, the closets, the bathroom, even under the bed. No one was there. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I messaged the host. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I just asked if there was any chance a cleaner or maintenance worker had come by without letting me know. The response was quick. No one had been to the cabin since before I checked in. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I had left the towel on the edge of the counter and it slipped off. Maybe the sounds I heard were just the house settling. I made it through the rest of the day without anything strange happening. Then that night I woke up again. This time, it was the sound of the front door handle rattling. A slow, testing movement. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. The cabin was completely dark, but I could hear it clearly. Someone was trying the door. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The noise stopped. I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could, creeping toward the living room. I pointed the light at the front door. It was still locked, but the porch light, which had been on when I went to bed, was off. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat up in bed with the knife next to me, waiting for morning. As soon as the sun rose, I packed my bags. I didn't bother messaging the host until I was already in my car, driving down the long dirt road back to town. I told them something had felt off, that I wasn't comfortable staying any longer. They didn't argue. They just apologized and said they understood. I never got an answer about what had happened. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But I don't think I imagined the footsteps. And I know, without a doubt, that I locked that front door. The Airbnb listing had seemed fine. A spare guest room in an owner-occupied house, described as pleasant and comfortable. It wasn't my first choice, but it was affordable, and the location was convenient for my trip. I didn't plan on spending much time there, just a place to sleep. Really. The reviews were mostly positive, though now I realize I had skimmed over them too quickly. A few mentioned minor issues, but nothing that raised any red flags at the time. I arrived late in the evening after a long day of driving. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly residential, and the house was a tall, older building with dark windows. I expected to meet the host, get a quick tour, and settle in, but when I pulled into the driveway, I got a text instead. The host wouldn't be there. He lived several miles away. The front door had a Wi-Fi-controlled lock, and he sent me the code to let myself in. That was my first uneasy feeling. I had booked under the impression that this was an owner-occupied home, meaning someone actually lived there, managed the place, and ensured things were in order. Instead, it was an empty house I'd be walking into alone, controlled remotely by a stranger. But it was late, I was exhausted, and I told myself it wasn't a big deal. People rented places like this all the time. I punched in the code. The lock clicked, and the door swung open into a dark hallway. I stepped inside and reached for a light switch. Nothing. I fumbled along the wall, trying different spots where a switch might be, but the place remained dark. The only light came from the faint glow of a stereo system still turned on somewhere deeper inside the house. That was the second thing that felt off. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight, sweeping the beam over the space. The dining table was set for a meal. Not just set, but abandoned mid-use. Plates with half-eaten food, glasses with water still in them, crumbs on the surface. Nearby, a pair of damp towels lay crumpled on the staircase. It didn't feel like an empty, professionally managed rental. It felt like someone had just been here and left in a hurry. I hesitated in the doorway. The host had sent me instructions on how to find my room. 3rd floor. I considered just leaving, but I was in a small town, and there weren't a lot of last-minute lodging options. I had already paid for the place. If there was anything truly wrong, I could leave in the morning. I moved carefully up the stairs, stepping around the towels. The wooden steps creaked under my weight. On the 2nd floor landing, my head rose just high enough to see into an open bedroom. I stopped instantly. There were 2 people in the bed, both completely naked, fast asleep. I froze, not even breathing for a moment. They had no idea I was there. I turned away, heart pounding. What the hell was this? I had booked a spare guest room, not a shared house with strangers sleeping a few feet away with no doors closed. Backing away slowly, I held my breath and continued up to the third floor as quietly as I could. When I reached my room, I pushed the door open, hoping for some relief. Instead, I found an empty, poorly furnished space with a bed, no bedside table, no lamp bulb, and no lock on the door. No lock. That was the third major issue, and it made my skin crawl. The bathroom I was supposed to use? Downstairs. First floor. I was too tired to deal with it. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath, staring at the door, feeling the lack of security settle deep in my gut. The whole setup was a mess. The towels on the stairs, the abandoned meal, the running stereo, the naked couple who had no idea I was in the house with them. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak in the house made me tense. I kept my eyes on the doorway, half expecting someone to come walking in by mistake. The thin walls made it impossible to relax. I could hear movement downstairs, soft footsteps, and what sounded like a phone buzzing repeatedly. I kept checking my own phone, counting down the hours until I could leave. I never used the bathroom. I didn't want to risk running into someone in the middle of the night trying to explain why I was there. The morning was worse. I waited until the sky turned light, then started packing my things as quietly as possible. I moved slowly, carefully, trying not to make noise. The last thing I wanted was to run into the couple on my way out. But as I crept down the stairs, I heard rustling from their room. I picked up my pace. I made it to the front door, unlocked it, and slipped outside into the cold morning air. My hands were shaking as I got into my car. I had never been more eager to leave a place in my life. As soon as I was on the road, I called the host. I told him everything. How unsafe it was. How those guests had no idea I was there. How there were no locks, no supervision, no way for any of us to know who else was renting rooms in that house. He didn't seem to care. He brushed it off, acting like it wasn't a big deal. That's when I realized this was how he ran the place. He rented out every bedroom to different people, treating it like a hostel without actually managing it. I spent the next several days fighting for a refund, arguing with customer service, sending emails, making phone calls. It was exhausting. The platform didn't seem to take safety concerns as seriously as they should have. In the end, I got some of my money back, but not all of it. The host continued renting out the place the same way. Looking back, I think about how lucky I was. If I had been someone else, if the couple in that bedroom had been someone else, things could have gone very wrong, could have been dangerous. And the worst part? That host is still out there, renting out unlocked rooms to unsuspecting strangers. The trip was supposed to be perfect. It was my birthday, our long overdue honeymoon, and a house hunting trip wrapped into one. After years of being stuck inside, worrying about everything from finances to health, my husband and I finally had the chance to get away. We planned the trip carefully, picking Oregon for its beautiful landscapes, fresh air, and quiet nature spots. We wanted peace, something to clear our minds before we took the next big step in our lives, buying a house. Finding the Airbnb had been easy. It had great reviews, a simple booking process, and 3 listed hosts. The house itself looked like a cozy retreat, tucked away from the main roads but still within driving distance of good restaurants and hiking trails. The pictures showed a clean, modern interior with lots of natural light, a comfortable-looking bed, and a spacious outdoor area. It looked perfect. We booked it a month in advance, paid in full, and received confirmation quickly. Everything seemed smooth. No hidden fees, no strange requirements, and the hosts were communicative. The check-in instructions were sent a week before our trip, with a detailed guide on how to get there and how to use everything inside the house. It felt professional, and we had no reason to expect anything other than a relaxing, enjoyable week. When we arrived, the place looked exactly like the photos. The kitchen was well-stocked, the bathroom was clean, and the bed was comfortable. The house had a warm, inviting atmosphere, and for the first couple of days, It felt like the break we desperately needed. We cooked meals together, took long walks, and spent the nights watching movies on the couch, finally feeling like we could breathe. There was no sign of any other guests or hosts. The place was ours. That changed on the third day. It was early afternoon when we finally met one of the hosts. Until then, we had only communicated through messages, but the man introduced himself as one of the 3 listed owners of the property. He was friendly at first, chatting about the town, asking about our stay, making casual small talk. Nothing seemed off. But then, as if it was an afterthought, he mentioned he'd be having a party that night. Party. I remember the way my stomach dropped when he said it. He didn't ask if we were okay with it. He just stated it like a fact, something that was going to happen whether we liked it or not. We had booked the house under the assumption that it was a quiet retreat. Now, suddenly, it was being turned into a party venue. It was a Thursday. We had planned to wake up early the next morning to go on a long hike, something we had been looking forward to for weeks. We wanted to be up at sunrise to see the view from one of the highest peaks in the area. But now that plan was at risk. When I asked how big the party would be, he brushed it off. Just a few friends, he said. He handed us his phone number and told us to text him if it got too loud. It felt like such a strange thing to say. Why not just message through the Airbnb app? Why was he telling us this in person instead of just giving us a heads up in advance? We had booked a month ago. Surely he had known about this party before today. Something felt off, but we tried to stay positive. Maybe it would just be a quiet gathering. Maybe we were overreacting. We weren't. The party started at 6. At first, it was just light music and chatter. We could hear laughter, occasional clinking glasses, the sound of a grill being used outside. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't unbearable. We figured we'd just go to bed a little later than usual and try to sleep through it. Then, around 9, it escalated. More people arrived. The music got louder. The laughing turned into shouting. We could hear people running in and out of the house, slamming doors, yelling to each other across the yard. By midnight, it was out of control. The music was so loud that we could feel the bass vibrating through the walls. People were arguing outside, their voices carrying into the night. We could hear bottles breaking, heavy footsteps on the wooden porch, the occasional sound of someone throwing up in the yard. It felt less like a party and more like an out-of-control frat house. I checked the Airbnb listing again, scrolling through the rules we had agreed to when we booked. No parties, no loud noise after 9 p.m. The host was breaking all of his own rules, completely disregarding the agreement we had made when we paid for our stay. We messaged Airbnb. An hour passed before we heard back. Not from Airbnb, but from the other 2 hosts. Their responses made it clear they hadn't known about the party. They apologized, but it was a generic, impersonal message, something that felt automated and insincere. There was no immediate action taken. We were stuck. Leaving in the middle of the night wasn't an option. We were in an unfamiliar area, exhausted, and had nowhere else to go. Our only choice was to suffer through it. At 4 in the morning, the party finally started winding down. By then, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too frustrated to sleep. I could still hear people outside, their voices slurred, their laughter hollow. The whole night had been ruined. We managed to get a few hours of restless sleep before the morning light crept through the curtains. But our plans were shot. We had planned to wake up early for our hike. Instead, we were so drained that we couldn't even function. Our bodies felt heavy, our eyes burning from lack of sleep. We tried to push through it, to salvage what we could of our last full day. But by noon, we gave up. We had to lay down midday and sleep, completely thrown off by the night before. The host never apologized. Instead, when we checked out, we got an automated message. "Hope you enjoyed your stay. Please remember to clean up before leaving." That was it. No acknowledgement of the party, no compensation for the night of ruined sleep. Nothing. We requested a refund for that night. No response. We sent Airbnb the house rules, the messages, the videos we had taken as proof. Still nothing. The worst part? They could review us, but we couldn't see anything until we left our own review. Felt like we had been backed into a corner. We didn't want to think about this experience ever again. We just wanted our money back and to move on. Days passed. No word from Airbnb. No word from the hosts. And in the end, that was the most frustrating part. How easily they could ignore us. How little it seemed to matter to them that our trip had been ruined. We had expected more. Instead, we got silence. Arriving at an unfamiliar Airbnb alone at 2 in the morning wasn't ideal, but my flight had been delayed, and there was nothing I could do about it. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from the main roads that the drive had taken me through winding, dimly lit streets. I had checked the pictures and reviews before booking. Everything looked fine. It was a single-story, 3-bedroom house with a small backyard, and the host had been great about communication. When I pulled up, the street was nearly silent. A few porch lights were on in the distance, but most of the houses were dark. The Airbnb itself looked just like the listing photos. White with dark shutters, a small front porch, and a driveway leading to a detached garage. There was a keypad on the front door, and I typed in the code the owner had sent. The lock clicked, and I stepped inside, immediately reaching for the light switch. The entryway was small, leading into an open living room with a couch, a coffee table, and a TV mounted on the wall. To the right, a short hallway led to the bedrooms and bathroom. I wheeled my suitcase inside, shut the door behind me, and locked it. It was late, and I was exhausted, but I wasn't the type to just throw my stuff down and collapse into bed without looking around first. I liked to get a feel for a place, especially since I was alone. I walked through the living room, flipping on more lights as I went. The kitchen was nice, with modern appliances and a small dining table. I checked the back door, it was locked. Everything seemed fine. I moved on to the hallway. 3 doors. One was the bathroom, one was the master bedroom where I planned to sleep, and the third was another bedroom I wouldn't be using. The master was at the very end of the hall. I walked toward it, reaching for the light switch inside, and that's when I heard it. A faint creaking sound from behind me. I turned quickly, my heart jumping. One of the bedroom doors, the one I hadn't opened, had moved. It was open maybe 2 inches now. I was sure it had been closed when I walked in. I stared at it, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I tried to tell myself it was just air pressure from me walking around, or maybe the house settling. I stepped toward it. As I did, the door slowly swung back, closing. Not a slam, not a sharp movement, just a steady, deliberate closing, as if someone on the other side was pushing it shut. I stopped in my tracks. Every hair on my body stood up. My brain immediately rejected every logical explanation I had come up with. That wasn't how air pressure worked. That wasn't how an old house creaked and settled. Someone was in there. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe I still wanted to believe it was something explainable. Maybe I was too tired to think straight. But instead of running, I stepped forward and pressed my hand against the door. I pushed just to see. There was resistance. It wasn't locked. It wasn't latched. There was nothing mechanical holding it shut. But when I pressed, I felt pressure pushing back. Someone was standing on the other side of that door, holding it closed. I don't remember making the decision to leave. 1 second, I was standing in the hall, my palm against that door. The next, I was backing up, grabbing my keys off the counter, yanking my suitcase back toward the front door. My pulse was pounding so hard I could barely hear over it. I fumbled with the lock, pulled the door open, and stepped out into the cool night air. I didn't stop. I didn't try to make sense of it. I didn't even look back. I dragged my suitcase down the front steps, across the driveway, and straight to my car. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, threw my suitcase in the back seat, and got in. I locked the doors, started the engine. Then I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. I could still see the house in my headlights. The front door was shut. No movement inside. No shadowy figures running past the windows. Nothing. Just a normal-looking house in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. I reached for my phone and called the host. She answered on the second ring, groggy but immediately concerned when I told her I had left. I tried to explain, But I was rambling, my words disjointed. She asked if I was okay, and I told her I was fine but wouldn't be staying. She didn't question me. Instead, she apologized and told me she would call the police. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. That door doesn't open on its own. If anything, it's a little hard to push sometimes. It shouldn't have moved at all. I thanked her and hung up. Then I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away from that house. I ended up at a gas station a few miles away, parked under the bright lights, hands still shaking. The host called back 20 minutes later. The cops had checked the house. No one was inside. No signs of forced entry. Nothing out of place. But she told me she believed me. I didn't care what they did or didn't find. I knew what I had felt. I knew that someone had been behind that door. Someone had been inside that house with me, waiting in that room, and they hadn't wanted me to open that door. I got a refund. I booked a hotel for the night. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door moving. I never went back. I booked the Airbnb thinking it would be a good place to stay while I got things sorted out. The listing looked fine, nothing fancy, but the price was right. I was looking for something long-term, and the host was offering a monthly stay. First, everything seemed okay. It wasn't the cleanest place I'd ever stayed, but I wasn't expecting luxury. I figured I could deal with it. I had no idea what I was walking into. The problems started slowly. The host took me off the Airbnb platform early on. She told me it would be easier for both of us, that I could just send payments directly, and I agreed. That was my first mistake. I should have known better, but at the time it didn't seem like a big deal. I was trying to keep things simple, and she made it sound like a normal arrangement. Then, little by little, things started getting worse. The house was filthy. Not just messy, disgusting. The kitchen was covered in grease and grime. The floors were sticky, and there was dust and hair everywhere. The bathroom was even worse. Mold in the shower, stains in the sink, and a toilet that barely flushed. The host never cleaned, not once. It was clear she hadn't even bothered before I moved in. There was another tenant, a long-term renter, who was an absolute nightmare. She never bathed, never cleaned up after herself, and the entire house reeked because of her constant marijuana use. The smell of skunk and sweat followed her everywhere. It clung to the furniture, the walls, my clothes. No matter how much I tried to air out my room, it never went away. I tried to stay out of her way, but she made that impossible. One day, she lost it over the downstairs toilet. I had been lying on the couch, resting, when she started slamming pots and pans, doors, anything she could get her hands on. Then she came right up to me, screaming, accusing me of stopping up the toilet on purpose. I barely had time to react before she launched into a 5-minute rant. Her face inches from mine, her breath reeking of old food and weed. She kept saying the downstairs bathroom was hers alone, that I wasn't allowed to use it. That was news to me. No one had ever told me that. I only used it because of my disabilities, because it was easier than going up and down the stairs all the time. I tried to explain that, but she didn't care. She just kept yelling, telling me it was obviously my fault the toilet was clogged. I felt trapped, completely cornered. My husband was upstairs, along with 2 other Airbnb guests who had been trying to sleep, but no one stepped in. No one said anything. I could feel their presence, their unease, but they didn't want to get involved. It wasn't until later that my husband told me he had heard everything, that he had been listening, waiting to see if it would escalate further. I reached out to the host, expecting some kind of support, but she ignored me. The only thing she responded to was about the toilet, telling me I should plunge it myself. That was it. No acknowledgement of the harassment, no concern for what had happened, just a casual suggestion that I take care of the mess myself. A week passed, and the toilet remained clogged. It wasn't until the smell became unbearable that she finally had her son bring over a snake. But instead of fixing it himself, he just left it in the garage for us to deal with. I refused. I wasn't about to fix a plumbing issue in a house I was paying to stay in. It wasn't my responsibility. As the days went on, I started feeling more and more uncomfortable. The host was becoming distant, avoiding my messages. Then, out of nowhere, she turned on me completely. She claimed I wasn't paying, even though I had proof that I was. I had sent her payments through Cash App, and I had the receipts to prove it. But that didn't matter. She reported to Airbnb that I had stopped paying, that I was squatting in her house, that she hadn't received a dime since I left the platform. Airbnb's response was to cancel my account. Just like that. No investigation, no hearing me out, nothing. They believed her. She was still renting out all the other rooms, still making money off the platform, but I was the one being punished. She even had the audacity to list the room I was still in as available for rent. Then came the eviction notice. I was shocked when I saw it, but I figured I had a good case. I had evidence. I had screenshots, payment history, proof that I had been paying her directly. I had a lawyer. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The judge barely even listened. He didn't care about the evidence. He didn't care about my lawyer's arguments. He just granted the eviction just like that. It felt like the whole system was working against me, like none of it mattered. The host had lied through her teeth, twisted the situation to make herself look like the victim, and somehow, she had won. Now, I was being forced out, and they were trying to charge me the Airbnb rate instead of what we had originally agreed on. More money, more lies, more ways to squeeze whatever they could out of me. Couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. I don't know where I'm going to go next. I have to figure something out fast. I can't believe I trusted this woman, that I ever thought this place would be safe. I've never felt so helpless, so trapped in a situation where nothing I did seemed to matter. This isn't over. I'm going to fight back. I don't know how yet, but I will. One way or another, she won't get away with this.